Well, you may remember that I put on a short but vigorous campaign to become the Pope a few years back. I shared my platform with you in a sermon, and I hope you found that as interesting as I did. Nobody voted for me, though, and now I am really glad, because this Pope is turning out to be quite a guy. And anyway, it's always better if the Pope is Catholic. In June, Pope Francis released a papal encyclical, a letter to all Catholics, or in this case, as he makes clear, a letter to all the world. There are not very many people on our planet who could pull off a letter to the entire world, but he is one. And the subject of the letter, the environment of our planet, certainly affects us all. He's not the first pope to address a missive to the whole world. In 1963, Pope John XXIII addressed us all in his encyclical Pacem in Terris on the subject of nuclear proliferation and the extreme and immediate danger to the world of the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, a danger which took another 2 decades to ease and which is now, for all our worries about rogue states, no longer a danger to life on this planet. These days, as Pope Francis rightly says, the danger is to, if not all, at least a good deal of the life on this planet, and especially to that large part of the human race which is poor, a special concern of this Pope, who's actually been a priest to the poor, living and working among them. In the part of the Catholic world this Pope comes from, South America, God is thought to have a preferential concern for the poor. So it's thoroughly in character for this Pope to insist that we must hear the cry of the poor. He's not the first Pope to speak out against the degradation of the earth, but he is the first to speak out so forcefully and using the powerful tool of the papal encyclical, which sets Catholic doctrine and practice. The earth needs all the powerful friends it can get right now, so this encyclical is a contribution to the debate which is welcomed by almost all people who have similar worries. It is mostly, however, not a document of science, although it is well grounded in science, and the Pope insists to skeptics that the science which calls global warming human-made is good science. Nor is it a document of global politics. Although Francis's interpretation of the likely effects of climate change focuses most heavily on the effects of climate change on the poorest people and communities and cultures, which is unusual. Most climate change analysis focuses on economics. However, Pope Francis moves briskly away from this topic. His interest is theology, and this encyclical is mostly a theological document, and a revolutionary one, which should be welcomed and understood by all who care about the earth, even those who are not Catholic or even believers in God. Pope Francis, rightly, in my opinion, sees the degradation of the earth as a problem caused by incorrect theology, or, if you will, a bad worldview. That incorrect worldview comes directly from the Christian mindset and ways of interpreting the Bible, and it is so deeply a part of our culture that we are all affected, even if we don't realize how. The word for that worldview is anthropocentric, the idea that human beings are the only really important thing on the planet, or even in the universe. It is a particularly Western viewpoint. Indigenous people and the people of the East have not historically had that idea. How did Westerners get to be such egomaniacs? Well, it might have started with the book of Genesis, which, as commonly translated in the West, has God tell Adam and Eve that they are to have dominion over the earth and subdue it. It's easy to imagine how those words would justify a theology which says that the earth is here for human use and has no other particular purpose, that we should tame its wildernesses, plunder its riches, and generally do what we like with it. The idea that it is proper to say, mine a mountain full of pumice down to a nubbin so we can purchase comfy, pre-worn-out jeans comes directly from that mindset. It's different, say, from the mindset of most indigenous peoples, which say that mountains, like people, have a certain integrity of their own and should be left in their most natural possible state. That the world of nature is not simply a world of natural resources for human use. Pope Francis lays waste to this common Western interpretation and to the Hebrew words of Genesis. He says that they were translated wrong from the beginning, and they should have had God say to Adam and Eve, not that they are to have dominion over the earth and subdue it, but that they are to till the earth and keep it. Francis's translation of these old Hebrew words would suggest that humans are meant by God to have a harmonious, mutually beneficial relationship with the earth. We are not meant to exploit and take and manipulate, but rather to care for the earth as good stewards, an earth which is seen as having its own intrinsic worth and dignity, just as people do. Pope Francis also upholds other biblical texts which are profoundly countercultural these days, texts which establish that God is the ultimate owner of the land, not people, texts which require Sabbaths, and not just the 1 day a week sort, but the 1 year in every 7 sort, even the Jubilee year every 50th year, in which all land is returned to the families to whom it was originally equally given, and all debt is forgiven, and all debtors who have been made slaves for their debts are freed. Francis goes much more deeply into texts which remind us that we are required to treat our fellow human beings with respect and accord them the dignity of being with us, God's beloved children. Those who have more are responsible to help those who have less in the biblical ethic. Not that that gets read that very often, but it is definitely there. Not only that, but there are texts in the Bible which remind us that we must treat the world's creatures well also. For instance, the Sabbath exists not only so that people can rest from their labor, but so the animals that help us can rest as well. Our ecological problems are rooted in bad theology and a bad worldview, a worldview or a theology which says that humans can and should exploit the rest of the world and its creatures, and probably also the weaker of our own species, for our unlimited benefit. We have enshrined this bad theology and worldview into an economic system, and Pope Francis also takes aim at that. He calls it the technocratic paradigm, the idea that all technology and knowledge is a good thing worthy of uncritical acceptance and to be put on the market so that some people can make money off of it. He is very critical of this worldview. He asks us to be more skeptical of the idea that more and newer stuff is the key to a good life. Now, most of these theological points have been noted by others. These radical-seeming ways of reading scriptures are the ways used by liberal Christians, Catholics, and Protestants, also by liberal Jews. But this is new to, let's say, mainstream Catholicism. And this pope goes even further in his interpretation. He proposes a new theology of relationship which emphasizes the fact that everything is related. And those of us who talk about the interdependent web of existence should be very happy about this. He calls this integral ecology. Traditional Christian theology has said over the years that human life is made possible and enriched by 2 fundamental kinds of relationships: our relationship with God and our relationship with other people who are made in the image of God and whose brothers and sisters we are. These 2 kinds of relationships are related. It's only possible to have a relationship with God if you have the experience of a relationship with people, for instance. And it's awfully hard to fully appreciate people who can, as we all know, be difficult sometimes if you don't begin with appreciating what you call the worth and dignity of every person, which theists believe exists because of being made in God's image, and non-theists simply take as granted, a humanist decision of faith. Pope Francis, in this revolutionary encyclical, says that there are not 2 fundamental relationships, there are 3. There is a person's relationship with God, a person's relationship with other people, and a person's relationship with the earth. They are all, he says, of equal importance. You can't imagine how radical this is. They are all of equal importance. Some liberal Christians have said this in the past, but when they have, they've gotten slapped down for being pagans. And here is the Pope saying the same thing. Traditional Christianity has actually never valued the earth. It has had actually a fair amount of trouble valuing even our human bodies because of how earthy we can be. Pope Francis will have none of this. Unitarian Universalists, of course, don't all believe in God. About a third of us have no use for that idea at all. But we believe in honoring the wisdom of others, and there is wisdom here for theists and non-theists alike. We, too, could benefit from thinking of our lives as having three vital foci which interact: our relationship with others, our relationship with the earth and material things, with its beauty, with its life, and a relationship with what is most meaningful to us: knowledge, beauty, love, whatever it is that brings the catch of awe to our breath or goosebumps to our skin. The UU Purposes and Principles names many of these things: the worth and dignity of individuals, mystery and wonder, and the earth as critical to us and our spirituality. And now we can welcome the Pope in. So, what the Pope said, which is, we have a big problem. We have soiled and misused our environment, and that's causing and will cause increasing suffering, especially to the poor. That problem has its roots in a theology or worldview of domination rather than stewardship, and pridefulness rather than relationship, and it has been enshrined in our economic systems. He offers two ways out of this conundrum. First, this radical new theology, and it has to be said that radical new theologies are not an everyday thing in the Catholic Church. And a renewed focus on living together, honoring and respecting our fellow human beings. He talks in glowing terms about the joys of community, family, and finding meaning in life's simple pleasures. He's wise enough to see how complex all of this is and suggests that individuals and communities and even nations will find different answers to the problem of saving the earth. He offers no easy solutions. He's not all about solar power or vegetarianism or riding bikes. He is about individuals, communities, and peoples finding respectful ways to live in the interdependent web of existence. No, he doesn't use those words. Those are our words. But really, this guy is our Pope. Anyway, that's what the Pope said. In saying it, he made a lot of people, especially a lot of American people, mad. He made politically conservative Catholics mad. Political conservatism has bought heavily into theologies of domination and made a shrine of what they call free market capitalism and what the Pope called technocratic anthropocentrism. The Pope made a lot of conservative Protestants mad, too, by reinterpreting some of their favorite Bible stories. He implicitly criticized American conservative leaders, secular and religious, on their just deny it strategy of dealing with global warming. And he made liberals mad, too, because he dealt with the problem of overconsumption and not with the problem of overpopulation. And he made people mad by vilifying technology. We do all love our technology, don't we? We can't really imagine living without it, and it's true that a good case can be made for the hope that redirected technology will go a long way towards staving off or avoiding an environmental crisis. Things like batteries and solar power, which will allow us, if we choose, to use them that way to mitigate the effects of global warming on the world's people. Now, most papal encyclicals, it has to be said, make barely a blip even on the Catholic horizon, much less on the world horizon. Nobody gets mad. There's no op-ed pieces in newspapers, and no UU minister devotes a sermon to them. The fact that so many people got mad at this encyclical gives me hope. Now, if you had elected me, the Pope, I would have done things a little bit differently. Not a lot differently, but a little bit differently. First of all, I would have left the Catholic hierarchy's abhorrence of abortion out of this particular encyclical as tangential. And I would have offered two paths to right relationship to the earth, not just one. The first and most important path, especially to us, the world's most powerful and richest people, and every single one of you is rich here, no matter how stressed out you are by money. The most important path for us to take is, as the Pope points out, the path of ending our obscene overconsumption of the world's resources. There's no doubt about it. This is ruining life on our planet. It's going to cause infinite suffering, especially of the poor, possibly of us all. But speaking of the suffering of the poor, if I were the Pope, I would offer a second path of saving the earth by giving women and men the ability to both enjoy their God-given, but sometimes messy, sexuality and reliably limit their family size. This would not have a great impact on global climate change. Global climate change is caused by the profligate rich, and we can never forget that for a moment. But it would have a big effect on families and ecosystems in the third world. That is also important. The second thing that I would have done differently if I were the Pope is to offer a little more nuanced critique of technology. Because it's not going away, it will be a part of any solution we manage to come up with to climate change. And I, for one, would appreciate having more tools to distinguish the good from the bad, the dangerous from the worthy. I, the Unitarian Universalist skeptic, not Christian, am ironically totally with the Pope when it comes to the theological parts of what he said. I love his reinterpretation of Scripture and expanded definition of human as bound into three kinds of relationships: with spiritual reality, with others, and with the earth. Love it. And I also live in a technological world. I need guidance on my relationship with that, too. So maybe that will be my next sermon. If so, you'll be the first to know. We close.